Welcome to the Uncharted podcast. I am your host, Inez Franklin. My hope for you today is that we discover faith beyond the boundaries. Uncharted is intended to be a safe place for you to listen, learn, and challenge yourself along your journey of faith. May grace and peace be with you today. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Uncharted with Inez Franklin, where we're rediscovering faith beyond the boundaries. And today, Kayleigh and I are talking about community. Is that a good thing?
Woohoo!
Is that like a
I
good
mean,
thing?
I feel like it is. I feel like, we can be hurt by community, so then we kind of can put our own negative spin on it. But I think at the core, community is intended for good. It's intended to be a positive experience. God gifts it to us, and
Yeah.
wants it for us. So it is a good thing. It just sometimes comes with some, issues or experiences along the
Yes.
journey.
Yes. So I agree with you. It is a good thing. We're going to talk about why it is a good thing. But yeah, I thought maybe this podcast, we want to go back and start about where our own sense of community came from. And like really, where did we think of community growing up and how is it looking like for us today? And so I'll start. So I was number 6 of 7 children. Number one. I always wanted to be number one. Sorry. Nope. I'm number 6 of 7
Yes.
children, raised by a single mother, but she was one of 12 siblings. So,
Oof.
and all those kids had 5, 6, 7 kids as well. So whenever we had family gatherings, there was 100 people or so. I have 40 some
Crazy.
or 50 cousins. I don't know most of them. I'm getting to know some of them thanks to social media. They find me and we connect, which is so cool. But the point being is that I grew up with a very strong sense of community. And being Puerto Rican, which means even though it's part of the United States, it's actually a culture that kind of behaves more in an Eastern context. So it's
Mhm.
communally driven. Maybe it's changing today, but still, I think is very much community driven versus being individualistic. And so I grew up with community is important. And I loved having everybody around. And it was just this great feeling of it. But at the same time, I also felt like in community, everybody knows your stuff. So I felt like I
Mm.
couldn't hide. And my personal coping mechanism is I hide. When I struggle with something, I want to just, you know, get away from, I used to go hide behind the closet and kind of be by myself. And that's where I would find peace in my heart from the chaos. So having a community that I could never escape was a bit of a challenge for me. And when we moved to California, excuse me, when I was 15, 16 years old, nobody knew us. I was literally walking down Hollywood Boulevard going to school and nobody knew me. When I was in Puerto Rico, and actually, this was when I was 15 and I was dating a young man, he literally walked me across the street and held my hand because, that's what boyfriends do. And it
What'd you
was so
do?
exciting and
Yeah.
romantic. It was so romantic. And he held my hand to go across the street so a car wouldn't hit me. And people told my mom that I was having sex with this boy, that I was
Oh.
pregnant. I mean, the gossip mill went crazy. Got on the bus, and by the time I got home, my mom had heard all things. We didn't even have a phone in our house. So sometimes community felt like suffocating, as I grew up.
Yeah.
So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, so, we actually grew up well, you raised us in a neighborhood that was very enclosed, and so although yes, I'm one of 3, right? I have my older brother and my younger sister, and then after, I got into high school, I then got 2 stepsisters too, so then there was 5 of us, but we never lived all 5 of us in the house because by the time you and Jim got married, they were already out to college
Yeah.
and beyond. So, I really feel like my life growing up was us 3, and then we didn't have a whole lot of family close by. However, we had a really strong sense of community in that neighborhood. Every single family within, a 200-foot radius was families we knew or people we knew. They knew us, they knew where we were, and so we would walk home from school and go play. We would be at home by ourselves, and there was no concern because we felt very safe, which nowadays is unheard of. I think even
Yeah.
then it was probably less common than what we experienced, but we were living in this very, very safe neighborhood where we could go ahead and do that and walk home and experience all of that. And so I grew up with community, but it looked different than what I experienced when I then turned 14 and we moved here to Orange County. You guys started attending Mariners. Excuse me. And then you guys got into a community group, and then I saw a totally different community. I saw a community of people that you really walked alongside with. I saw a sense of community in which it was very intentional relationship. These people were people who still today are very, very treasured people to us.
Yeah.
They were at my wedding to my ex-husband. They've walked through many, many pieces of my life because of this community group that you guys had. And so it's as if I had this family all of a sudden because of the community group that you guys were a part of. And I'd even say now, right? You're a part of community groups now that and life groups now that have then had a massive influence in my life because of that. And so I got to see a very different depiction of what community looked like when I got into high school and beyond because of that experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And obviously some people listening today may have had either a childhood with a very painful community, right? A situation in the community, or a good one, but then they've joined a church and it's been a very difficult experience. So we
Yeah.
want to acknowledge, right, that there is because we're dealing with people, there is an imperfection to how community gets lived out, right? Where sometimes it's great. Like, for example, with our light group that we started when we moved to Orange County, I remember because Jim and I signed up to be in a small group because pastor was like,
Yeah.
you have to be in a small group. So we're like, okay, we filled out the card and we checked out all the boxes of the various ages that we fit. Like we were parents of teenagers, we were parents of a kid in elementary school. We had adult children because Jim's daughters were in college. We were parents of college kids. We were a blended family. We checked off all the boxes, but what we didn't realize is they put us on all the list. So the very first day, we had 27 people show up at our house because it was like that. It was like people sign
Oh
up
my
and then they
god.
show up on the first day.
Yeah.
27 people. And there was so many people, they didn't fit in one room, so we had to split
Yeah.
it into two groups. I talked to one, Jim talked to the other. And by the very next Wednesday, because we used to meet every Wednesday, I don't know if you remember that,
Yep.
the group went down to, I think it was 14 of us from 27. Like a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
just like, boop, they bailed out.
Yeah.
Thank goodness that at the time I was so eager for community that I didn't let that like injure my heart. In my
Mm.
mind, I felt like, oh, good. We got to get to a smaller group. This was too many. And I'm not taking this
Yeah.
personally. These people have to go find somewhere. But I don't know. I think in a different setting, I might have looked at that as rejection, the people who left. So
That's
sometimes,
such a good
right?
yeah, that's such a good, like, recognition because when you said that, it just reminded me that I've led my fair share of, uh I'm trying to remember what we call them now. We don't call them life groups, we call them community groups. Community groups is what we call them at my church. I've led a fair share of them, and, the very first thing they teach you in the training is, like, oh, there's going to be this kind of influx and then a kind of release. People leave, they're not interested, it's not the right thing for them, their schedule gets busy, whatever. So, you're kind of set up to expect that you're not gonna have the same grouping that you start out with.
Mm,
But I then did lead community groups and Bible studies in church I was in high school and college. Very different experience, and I didn't anticipate that. And I would be like, "Oh, where is everyone?" And I really thought through that much differently than I did as I was in my, 30s and having this experience of like, "Oh, I'm just going ahead doing this," and having this preset. So I can't imagine that if someone wasn't given that awareness or being told that, "Hey, expect that these numbers are gonna shift, people are gonna find the ones that fit best for them," right? How startling that could really feel in that moment of just like,
yeah.
"Where did everyone go? What did I do?" You
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Exactly, and by the way, we thought all those things. I mean, I remember because
Yeah.
we split the group into 2 groups, and, first of all, we told everyone that this was brand new to us. Neither one of us were trained. We didn't know
Mhm.
27 people were gonna show up. There were so many different ages and life stages showing up that to try to find a group that connected with each other was gonna be hard. And
Yeah.
so we were very transparent, like, "We don't know what we're doing. I don't know why they sent us 27 people." So probably a good amount of them left because of that, like, "These people don't know what they're doing. Let's get out of here." And at the
So
time,
funny.
it was the truth, so even though it was a bummer, I always thought like, "Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
know what we're doing. So whoever's here has to know that we're all gonna figure this out together." And sure enough,
Totally.
truly, those are the people who did stay. A few people came and went over the years. That group was together for 4.5 years. But all of us figured it out together because none of us knew what it looked like to be in a community like this, and
Yeah.
how transparent we should be with one another, how vulnerable, all that stuff we figured out along the way. I remember
Yeah.
one time I was. This was a time in my life, my journey of because I just started my journey, and I really felt by God called to be very transparent about my story. Jim and I were together. Obviously, we were married now, but we had started a relationship with an affair. We were being very honest about that. But that was
Yeah.
being honest about other things in my life as well. I felt like, one day I'm going to be in front of Jesus, in front of a cloud of witnesses, and everybody's going to know my junk. I don't want to wait until heaven for people to go, "Oh my goodness, you never talked about that." I was like, I'm just going to be transparent now.
Yeah,
And it's
totally.
like, this is who I am. This is my mess. It's like, love me or don't love me. I am loved by Jesus. That's what matters. And so I was doing that. And I remember one of our group members said, "Goodness gracious, we have to tell all our stuff here. It's like, is this a confessional?" And
And
I
we're
was
like,
like,
"Oh, wait."
did I go too far? Did I
Yeah.
say too much?
Well, and I think it's
We
so
figured it
interesting.
out.
There was this, I just heard about this kind of like different friendships for different seasons or different spaces, right? Like a work best friend versus an OG best friend, someone who's been in your life your whole life, versus a North Star best friend, someone who's like just always been there through the hard moments, versus a seasonal best friend, someone you talk to all the time in that season, and then maybe it shifts. And I think that like it was a really good concept because the idea is what we expect out of people as a community or as an individual sometimes then can dictate how we show up in relationships in
Yeah.
that space. And so, especially talking like community groups and learning and how we talk about it, it is part of this process that if we go in knowing, okay, this is how we share, this is what the conversation is that we're having, then we know what to expect and we know how to show up in that space. You jumped in head first, and everyone who was with you kind of learned to jump in with you and figure out what that looked like. Um, but I have to believe that that is how we ultimately get our feelings hurt sometimes in community is maybe we're
Yeah.
expecting from a group or from a friend or whoever in one way that then they cannot meet or they choose not to meet. And then it feels like a personal affront, whether intentional or not.
Yeah.
Why can't they be there? Why can't they meet me in that spot? Or I feel like I've just now exposed my entire soul. And they're like, that's great. I wore the color green the other day and I hated it. Right. Like, that's just totally different. Like-
So true. Oh
and
my
so,
gosh.
like, having someone or having people who meet you at those different stages is sometimes challenging and hard. And it's like finding those right people.
Yeah. Well, and in a way, you have to grow a compassion for yourself and for others
Hmm.
because the reality is you're putting people who are broken, they're not perfect. We all bring our stuff, our histories, our
Yeah.
issues, our brokenness to the group, and it affects our relationships just like that affects every relationship in our life. And so
Yeah.
just knowing, hey, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say some things that are wrong or maybe someone else will, and just having a little bit of thick skin that says
Yeah.
like I can't take everything that happens personally, and try to pause before letting it offend you too quickly because
Totally.
you can easily get offended in a life group, in a small group. every week
On anything. Yeah, I was gonna say,
because we
and
do
even
stuff.
in anything, right?
Yeah.
Relationships are complicated. I think I have, my favorite saying in that form of offense is that offense is a choice. It's a choice we make,
Yeah.
right? That when someone says something or does something or whatever, it's our choice to be offended or not offended. And it really puts the onus back on ourselves to take ownership for the reaction we're giving in a moment. At the same time, I think it is a learning process when we are finding friendships, relationships, community about where people fit that's best for us. So,
Yeah.
I think a great ways to find community is to join a Bible study or a life group or whatever it is that your church calls it. I think every church calls it something slightly
Yeah.
different, and have an understanding of what that group is intending. You're a part of a life group at Mariners now. That means that you guys are walking through every season of life together. Yes, you
Right.
study the Bible. Yes, you do these other things, but the intention is for life. TFH, my church, does community groups because they want you to find your own life groups in your own season and space, but they want to give you an opportunity to learn the Bible better, get to know more people in community, right? So it's a community group. So I think going into those groups and finding those groups and knowing what to expect from them is so
Yeah.
helpful. But what are some other ways that people can, find community if not through a church group?
Yeah. So I'm going to add one more step before answering the question, and that is
Sure.
I think what you just said is so powerful. And walking into that group and asking, what are we? What are we hoping to do together? What are the
Yeah.
rules of our gathering? Just being willing to come with questions, to be informed, and to basically even model. If the leader doesn't do it, then you ask the questions and force the conversation. So yeah, that's super good. So other ways to be in community, obviously, is just with your neighbors. So I grew up with my family was my community. You grew
Yeah.
up with our neighbors were your
Yeah.
community. Then we shifted to our church became our community. I mean, we only knew a few people in our neighborhood at that
Yeah.
time. So all our
Totally.
community was our church. All that to say that community can look different, not only from each other, but also in seasons of life where, we
Beautiful.
move somewhere. And for example, people who move, they don't know someone, they don't know a church, maybe their family is far away, they don't know their neighbors. Well, then maybe that's where an online community can be helpful. One thing
Mhm.
I really love that Mariners Church is doing now, and I think a lot of churches are doing this since COVID, is they are getting serious about online church. Now, is it ideal? Of course not. Being with people is the better way to go. But when that's difficult for a billion reasons, having online community where you meet through Zoom and by the way, which we did during COVID and found out like, hey, we
Yeah.
can keep up with our family and our friends. It's not the same, but it's not that bad. It's actually
Yeah.
doable. And so we have online groups of Mariners, people who actually only meet through online. And then that encourages them one day to go, hey, let's fly somewhere and all meet and let's gather because it's been so fun to get to know each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you can have a community of friends, you can have a community of just women gathering together or men gathering together. And actually, I think you need a variety of them. Don't you agree, Kaylee?
Yeah. Yeah,
How
absolutely.
many groups are you in? I'm curious.
Gosh, yeah, so, well, right now it's kinda interesting, like, right now I feel like I have, like, a group of friends that have been with me for a very, very long time, right? So my community is, people that are, like, besties for life, right? I think all of them have been friends with me for we've been friends for at least over 10, 15 years. One of my best friends has been my friend since I was 3 years old, right? So it's like, this is
Mm,
that. I also am a part of the production team at church. That is a whole community all by itself.
yeah.
And
Oh
then
yeah, your
I'd say
work.
even
That's another
yeah,
area of community, right? Your
yeah,
peeps at work.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so I feel like I work in multiple facets and get to work with people in different ways, but I feel like at church even too, like being a part of a serving team has really been influential in me connecting to the church, and they're some of my closest friends now are people that I
Yeah.
serve alongside or work alongside on Sundays. But then I'd say even the greater church area, I've led, I think 3 or 4 groups now, at TFHOC, and so I've gotten to meet people all over the country because I've always done them online. So I have gotten to meet people from all over the place, that are a part of the TFHOC family, that are people who still check in on me, still ask how things are going, and vice versa. We pray for one another. So it's a really cool way of doing that. And then, of course, I do have my family, which my family is large, not nearly as large as your experience growing up, but I do have my sister and my brother and my stepsisters and the nieces and nephews. And then I also have my daughter's school. I've met a lot of
Yeah.
moms and families through both of my daughter's schools. That has also been a group that has built community around that we've been able to talk through the different seasons of life that our kids are going through that are similar. And so I think that there are just so many areas in which I have built community, and that has been massively influential for me.
Yeah. And let's face it, we're wired to be in community. We are created by a triune God who's always in relationship. We're
Yeah.
wired to be in, and we're going to find it in all those ways. There's also, say, for example, even NA and AA and these kinds of groups where we're gathering people around a particular healing process or a technical area. Like, I don't know, we're into Star Wars, and there's a whole community of people who are into Star Wars or into movies or into mechanical engineering, whatever. I mean, there's so many ways to group with people. So it's just how we're wired, right?
Yeah.
And then one thing, so we talked about the importance of knowing like what are we expecting from that group and even voicing it in front of them. But also, I think like what to do when we get hurt by our community. Like
Mm,
if we've been hurt, obviously our first inclination, well, depending on your personality, some personalities fight. They just like in your
yeah.
face. And I remember we had in our group, one of our members wasn't showing up to the meetings very much. And then one day she showed up with her husband and she hadn't been there for a while. Her husband would come, but she wouldn't come. And so one of the other members of the group was getting really hurt by that, but we didn't know that. She didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And her way of handling that pain was when the other women started asking questions about, what was going on with the group or people's lives, the response was, "Why should I tell you anything? I tell you my story and then you don't show up next week or for 5 weeks. I feel very
Mm,
vulnerable that I'm over here sharing my story, but you're not sharing yours because you're not here." And I don't know how if I'm saying it. I know I'm not saying it exactly how she said it, but it was a sting to that woman who
yeah.
hadn't been there for a while, and she finally shows up, decides to show up, and she was so hurt, by that statement. So they were both hurt. And
Yeah.
here there's two beautiful women who now, by the way, they're in good relationship. All that got healed, but at the time, that was a pretty painful thing. And
Yeah.
one chose to push and the other one stopped coming for a while. And so we had to help
Yeah.
her kind of re-enter the group. So I'm personally the person that runs. If I get hurt, I just separate. I go, I don't need this. I'm going to back up, right?
Yeah.
Um, some people push, and so talk about that. How,
Yeah.
how have you been injured and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, so I feel like this is an area I've recently, and I'd say recently is in like the last few years, like really grown in. I definitely was a runner or a avoider, oh, you're upset. Okay, I'm just gonna stay over here and wait until it passed. Or I would placate the person who was hurt. So let's say I was the woman who wasn't there and then showed up and someone snapped at me or got upset with me, even if it was out of a place of a hurt, I just would have immediately apologized. And then I probably would have showed up even if I didn't want to because I felt like I needed to, like, oh, well, I don't want to hurt her feelings again. So now I'm just going to like extra show up. And but over the years, I've really learned to, nope, that's not actually helpful or healthy. It's instead something that I need to work on and I need to be able to be okay with what's important to me and expressing that. And so I have learned to always express my needs or my experiences through love while also sharing, hey, this is how that hurt me or this is what's going
Yeah.
on. So, in the same way that we said earlier that offense is a choice, right? Like I am equally able to be the one that's offended there, but if I am feeling that, then in that moment it's why am I feeling offended? What did she say? Why is that personal to me? How can I then communicate that with um a loving way of, hey, I love you, I'm for you, I want to honor you. And also, this thing hurt me. How do we communicate about that? Like, how can we process through that? Can we try to figure out a way to not do that again? Because I want to value our friendship, or I want to value our relationship, or our community group, or whatever it is that we're a part of. How do we get ourselves back there? And that has been massively helpful to me. I also think that, not gossiping, choosing honor over gossip,
Yeah.
not if we're experiencing something for ourselves that's hurtful or hurting, is not to go out and be like, this person did this to me, blah, 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 and tell
Yes.
every other person except for the person who's experiencing it. Or
Yeah.
even after the conversation has happened, not then saying, oh, yeah, we had this conversation this week. Now,
That's right.
I
That's
want to
right. Because in scripture, it says that we should go to the person,
go to the
right? That's the
person. Yeah.
honorable way to deal with our conflict. Exactly.
Yeah. I think it even says somewhere in scripture that if you have an issue with the person that you're worshiping
Yes.
with, that you're like to leave the space and fix the problem before
Yes.
continuing to worship, because otherwise our worship is garbage. Like, it's very,
Yeah.
like, God's like very much like, do not be in conflict unnecessarily with others, like,
Yeah.
make things right. And so I think that it is
Or at least
important
do your
to,
part, right?
yeah,
Sometimes you can't
right.
stop the other person from their behavior, but you can do your part and at
Yes.
least make the attempt to reconcile and know that you have a clear conscience that you are willing to work on the situation
Yeah,
if that person is not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think just like being willing to have that conversation, and make every attempt to at least have
Yes.
the conversation, make sure you both are on the same page about it. That may not ultimately fix it. Sometimes pain takes time and healing
Yes.
requires patience. And that's okay. I think that's an okay place to be. But I think also just acknowledging, hey, like, I'm not okay. We're not okay. This thing happened. So that's been a big area that I've had to work towards. And sometimes I get conflict fatigue because I am
Yeah.
my habit is to say, no, it's fine. Um, and that really steps into a whole another thing we don't have time for today, which is like proper boundaries in
Yeah.
relationships. But I think it's just this good reminder of, being willing to have the conversation and come forward, and then give space to
Yeah.
allow the other person to respond, heal, you to heal, whatever it is that needs to happen.
Yeah. And all this said in the context that there are times when the it's okay to leave a group,
Yeah.
especially if there is a toxic situation going on, a toxic person in the group, or the whole toxic culture. I was in a group once, actually a professional group, where a person came into the group and they were very toxic and they basically intoxicated everybody else. It seemed like
Oh,
we got more unhealthy as a group as this person, the longer that person was in the group. And two of us could see the trajectory of what was happening to our group, and we could not convince the others. So ultimately,
yeah.
the two of us did leave the group, and they were left with the toxic person, and they had to work themselves through a journey of realizing, oh, this person has some problems that she's bringing to this group and really harming the way that we're operating as a group. She had problems with boundaries, with showing up on time, with over talking everyone else, giving advice when she wasn't asked to, saying mean things to others. There was a lot of things that she needed to work on. And ultimately, she ended up leaving the group. And then the women kind of woke up to like, oh my goodness, this person had
That
changed
was
our group
hard.
so much. And
Yeah.
what's really fun is the group is back together and
Oh,
minus that situation and
yeah.
doing really well as I heard lately. But sometimes we do have to leave a group,
Yes.
and it doesn't mean we're done with being in community, but we can go back and try again.
Yeah.
But
And I
certainly
think,
it's okay to leave. Sometimes we have to
yeah.
leave. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying too is really good. It doesn't mean, okay, this one group or this one person has hurt me, so therefore I'm never going to be in community again. Right? We
Yeah.
have to be cautious to acknowledge, yes, this is not how I wanted to handle it. I'm going to have this conversation. I may need to exit a situation, and I'm still going to go and be in community, in relationship with others. Like you said,
Yeah.
which I think is beautiful. God is a triune God.
Yeah.
He is in himself in community at all times.
All
He
right.
wants for us to be in community. He literally saw man and said, "It is not good for man to be alone," and created a
That's right.
helper. And so I
Yeah.
think it's important to acknowledge that that's just so important no matter what. It doesn't have to look the same that it
Right.
does for
That's
the
right.
person next to you, or even how we are talking about it. We both have very vibrant, large, lovely communities right now, which has not always been the case, but we do have it in this season. But for some people, that may be 1 to 2 very good friends who
Right.
walk with them. That may be a mentor. That may be a pastor that's willing to walk through. It's okay if you moved across the country or to another city and now your friendships look different. It can
Right.
take time. And so don't be discouraged if you're listening to this podcast today and saying, I don't have that. Okay, shoot. It's
Yeah.
okay. I think we all find what works best for us. It's just a matter of finding and putting ourselves out there to be in community.
That's right. And understanding how important it is. And like again, even if we've been hurt, that it is in community that we find healing as well. And
Yeah.
just always making that a desire. And like we talked earlier, it is something that God requires us of, not because He's wanting to lord over or command over us, but because that's where we flourish when we are in community with one another. He requires us because it's good for us. And then the other thing is I found as we close is I found that in community I've grown the most. So
Yeah.
our I've learned how to pray because in our groups, different groups that I've been in, we've had to pray for some really hard things that we think it's not going to happen. So I've learned how to pray boldly, but I also have learned how to pray with my hands open, knowing that sometimes the circumstances don't happen the way I want. I've learned how to be there for someone in a long journey when someone's suffering is like for a long, long time and they're telling the same story over and over and they'll say, "Oh, I feel like a broken record. I keep telling you the same pain." And being a person that's willing to sit with someone when they're in that long-term pain it's something you have to grow to learn to do because we all want
Yeah.
to very quickly move on to like, okay, can we get over it and get on to life? Well, no, for some people, their suffering is long and hard and
Yeah.
lonely and repetitive. And so I learned how to do that. I've learned how to celebrate other people's joyful moments and lament in their painful moments and not rush either one, really sit
Yeah.
in both faithfully. So there's just, I mean, that's just a few things that I've
Yeah.
learned in community that's where we flourish because there's so much that we
Yeah.
gain from it. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think that's so true. And I think even like just to add to that, even learning how to hold both simultaneously, right? I have walked through many stories with people where they have both been in a season of full grief and full joy, that there's been something
Yeah.
so positive and something so negative simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I have really learned even through them how to experience that for myself, right? Like, how are
That's
they
good.
processing through? How do I pray and walk through them? And how do I hold that for myself? So I think that community is so good for us. And, if you're someone today who's listening to this who's been hurt by a community, we get it. Both of us can say we have been hurt by community too. We understand what it's like to be
Yeah.
hurt by those you hold close, who you love, but don't give up because it's
Yeah.
hard. Don't give up because of one experience or two experiences. Keep trying because it's what God has for you. And just this one last thing I'm going to leave with you is pray through it, pray for it, and pray in it. Ask God to bring the people around you. I know that's what you guys did. You said, Lord, bring us a community of people who are believers, and God did that and in abundance, and so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just don't forget to do that. If you are seeking community or feeling like you're at a loss, pray about it and God will be with you on it.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, folks, for listening in today. I mean, we could have talked so much, and I know that there's a loneliness epidemic out there. So we're not making light of the fact that sometimes community can be very hard to find. And so, hey, we want to hear from you. If you want to share your thoughts, your comments, your own experience, send us an email at hello@inesfranklin.com. And we would love to pray for you. If you're in that season of deep loneliness, we would love to pray for you and ask together with you for the Lord to help you find that community, even if it's, like I said, one person, two people to walk life with you. And yeah, for the rest of us, please tune in for our podcast. If you have not subscribed, hit that subscribe button either on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you then on our next time.
Thank you for listening to Uncharted Podcast with Inez Franklin. Learn more about Inez at unchartedpod.com. Follow Inez's journey on Instagram at Inez Franklin. Sign up for our email list to receive direct access to online experiences and more. Thanks for listening, and join us again next time.